Welcome to the Scottish Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host Chris, and here we'll be delving into the multitude of strange occurrences that happen within Scotland and beyond. You can contact us with your accounts at the Scottish Paranormal Podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on all social media channels, and you can contact us by either means. Right, hi, we've got Michael Dunnan tonight on the show. He's got a website, the Yew Mysteries. Thanks for coming on, Michael. Nice to meet you. And how's things you're in tonight?
Thanks, Chris. Nice to meet you too. Things are well over here in New England, where I am now. It's kind of a covering of snow on the ground. So, but you know, not too bad. Usually it's a lot more snow than this, but at this point in the year. So I'll take it.
We're the same. We've had a wee bit of snow on and off. It was quite cold for the last week or so. That's just all melted now. It was today. It was like 7 or 8 degrees. So I'm hoping that you probably got a few weeks and it'll be snow again. And over here it's kind of a bit fluctuations in the weather these days. You know what it's like. So.
Oh yeah.
So if you want to kind of introduce yourself and a wee bit about your website, and then what I would really like to do is if you could run through obviously the story that you had, obviously that got you into the Yew Mysteries and things like that, and the shamanistic side of it and things as well. When I kind of somebody put me onto your story and your links to your website and stuff like that, and it was just, as I said to you, it was quite synchronistic because that day had been at Roslin dropping my dog off, and somebody just popped a message to say you need to get this guy on, and I had a look through, and the first bit of the story linked to me because obviously, as I explained to you, I surf up in that area, and I know the area quite well. And so that's when I dropped you a message. But then when I said I was at Roslin that day, and you'd mentioned that there's a kind of large yew tree down there, really, really old. I was there. I went down there that day. So it was really kind of synchronistic, and I kind of thought like, they get you on, and I was really intrigued with the story. I heard a bit of the story, and there's good parts that I'd like to ask a few questions about. But I'd like to hear kind of the full kind of run of it and go for there. So if you want to do a wee intro first, and then you could run into it if you want and.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's great that you were in Roslin just when you got that message. That's definitely synchronistic and pertinent, and because it's a powerful place there, and that yew there is really we call it the mother yew, and it's a very, very stunning old yew tree, and there are many more in the glen, actually, quite a few yews in that glen. So. We've done some Yew Mysteries trainings there, and actually, used the glen and all the yew sites to move through, and it was it was a very, very wonderful experience. But yeah, the Yew Mysteries is something that it's creating a mystery school is something that I was kind of reluctant to do, but over the years. Just with the nature of the work, it seemed like the only way or the best way to sort of present the work. Mm-hmm. So that the Yew Mysteries has kind of grown out of my own direct experience. Mm-hmm. It took place, as you know, in the north of Scotland. It began in the north of Scotland, back in 1987, and I can go back and cut the story in a minute, but. From there, the experiences led me back to Edinburgh, and in Edinburgh, my health was fairly shattered at that point from that experience, and I had quite a bit of help from friends who realised I was struggling and having a difficult time staying incarnated and able to manage myself in the world,
Mhm.
And through a series of events with a partner, actually, she pulled me out of Edinburgh into East Lothian,
Mhm.
which I didn't know anything about. I had no originally from Glasgow. I came over to my family travelled over to Fife early on to Dunfermline, and I went to art school in Edinburgh. So Edinburgh was a whole new experience for me, and then East Lothian I knew nothing of because my parents were West Coast, and they didn't really know the East
Mhm.
side very well. So East Lothian was quite a magical place to go to.
Mhm.
Beautiful, sort of bucolic and rolling hills, very lovely near the sea
Mhm.
where I was, and it was. It ended up being a very healing place for me, and it was where this ancient yew is located, or where this ancient yew is located,
Yeah.
and that was. At the moment, I'm writing a memoir about all of that. It's taken me quite a long time, but I was kind of led to the yew by a tree surgeon, strangely enough, who we were in the pub, and one thing led to another, and we ended up in the yew about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was quite a dramatic experience for me. And from then on, the next morning, I knew I had kind of come home to this great being had kind of called me, and I
Mhm.
went back the next day, and almost 10 years went by of spending time there and being called there. And
Mhm.
then after that, that took me to about 2003, and from there, I was sequence of events led me to the USA.
Mhm.
So I was just thinking before I came on with you that in April that'll be 20 years I've been here,
Mhm.
which seems incredible now to me that I would end up being here for 20 years. But the reason I'm saying that is that this was the place that helped to birth the Yew Mysteries in a way.
Mhm.
Somehow coming away from Scotland and coming to this other country that has a different kind of mindset. There was something about freeing about coming to the USA
Mhm.
in a way, saying people would say, well, tell us your story. What happened? We want to hear about it. And I had been, not really thought that that would be a story I would tell. So I started telling the story about, 20 years ago when I first came to the USA.
Mhm.
And things built from there. I got invited to workshops, to teach workshops. And slowly, over a period of years, I sort of developed a language where I could communicate what had happened to me.
Yeah.
And that language kind of gradually solidified into a sort of set of principles that I could teach in workshops,
Mhm.
sometimes very short and very brief, say in events on the west coast of the USA. Other times for longer chunks of time, where the Yew Mysteries now has sort of 10 modules to it,
Mhm.
so it becomes a little bit more involved. So that's a sort of brief sort of sketch
Yeah.
of where it is now. And now I'm still planning to teach you mysteries again soon.
Mhm.
Um, of course, the last few years sort of put a stop to that, and things are now resuming slowly. So I'll be back in Scotland to teach the Yew Mysteries. Probably, I'm thinking probably next year at this point. I'm not sure if it's going to happen this year. Um, I'm a craniosacral therapist, which is it's like a form of body work that was developed originally out of osteopathy.
Mhm.
So that has informed my work a lot as well. Being involved in the healing arts on virtually a daily basis
Yeah.
has really helped me to consolidate and so there's a kind of been a marriage, a sort of blending, a union of various strands to bring this Yew Mysteries that I needed. It wasn't just one thing. So shall I kind of jump back to the 87 and go?
Yeah, yeah. If you want to jump back there and we could progress and I'll ask more questions as we go.
Sure,
That's
just
all
please
right.
interrupt me. Yeah, interrupt me at any point. It's a story with various chapters. So
Yeah, I was totally intrigued when I heard of it. And sometimes I don't like hearing the stories beforehand because you might not ask the same questions because some people like hearing the story beforehand, but I like kind of hearing it first off as much as I can for the fact that if you know the answer that you might not know you might not ask the question again and things like that. So I
yeah,
was really, really intrigued by it. So yeah, so if you want to kind of go back to even what took you up there and go for there, or where you think the journey started for yourself, and you want to kind of start for there.
Yeah, I'll start. I could start. Just give the. I think it's a really good place to start. Is it really kind of at the beginning, and I think it paints a kind of interesting picture in a number of ways. And coming from a working class background and not really having access to these sorts of concepts or these sorts of experiences, I think it's a useful way to begin. But I had, I suppose, let's go back to Edinburgh and art school, which is what was really the kind of pivot that swung me up there, really up into Thurso area.
Mm-hmm.
I had been, as an art student, there's a kind of naivety about that. You kind of come through art school and you have a proclivity to as an artist, and you come through thinking this, that, and the next thing, that you're going to be, soaring out of art school into creating great masterpieces that are going to sell, and you're going to get shows in galleries in London or something like that. Of course, that's not what happens. So you come out and you go on the dole, which is what we all did, and so we sort of 86, I finished art school. And it was around about, I think an important piece to put in here, because it links later, was the Chernobyl disaster, which took place in April 1986. Mm-hmm. So while I was at the art school, this great calamity had taken place, that we were all extremely worried about at the time, of course, and, taking iodine pills and things like that at the art school, and everybody was kind of panicking about it. And it was a big deal. And so when I left art school, went on the dole, I'll pick up that piece in a minute because it's relevant. Mm-hmm. You're too young to maybe exactly to be in that around at that time, but the government, the Tory government, had initiated I can't remember exactly what it was called, like job training scheme or something like that.
YTS.
Is that what it was? Right.
YTS. And yeah, I can remember that.
Yeah, so they caught a lot of us. My only interest was getting up, going to my studio, which I had in Rose Street in Edinburgh, an old abandoned flat that was falling to pieces, and making art. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't want to do anything else. So, and you needed time to do that. You needed the day to sit there and contemplate, and all of the stuff that goes on in your young head, and of course, I got the letter eventually, hauled in to the job centre and told that I would either have to take one of their schemes, or I would lose my dole money, basically. Hmm. So I think that's how it went, but it's a long time ago. And I remember.
Give me 2 seconds. I've got my husky here. She's asking me. I took her in here because she was sitting in the living room. She was herself, so they just come over, and she was lying sleeping. Now she's like wanting out. So come and see her. I'll let you see her. Come here. It's a 17-month-old husky. I'm going to pop up the house. I'll let you see her first before I. You say hello.
Oh, beauty.
Put her back in the house because she's going to get back out again. Sorry about that. I usually always keep her out, but tonight she had just had a shower and she was like kind of curled up. All the kids are away to bed and stuff, so I was like, come out.
That's right. It's kind of late. Where you are, it's at 9:15, isn't it, by now?
Yeah. But she was fine. She was lying there, but I kind of heated it up before I came in, so it's probably too hot for her, but she's quite to get out. So do apologise.
Oh, don't worry about it. I have a cat here, so she might make an appearance at some point as well. We could get another interruption if she decides to jump on the computer or knock it over or something. So anyway, so yeah. got caught, and to kind of set the tone of how I ended up north. I was looking around. The jobs were pretty bad, so there was one that a friend of mine had been caught a couple of weeks before me, maybe a month before me, at the King's Buildings at the university in Edinburgh, was redesigning their natural history collection, which was in pretty bad shape at that time. And so he had been involved in building these models, the tree of life, to look at all these kind of mollusks, and all the way up to the human, the so-called pinnacle of the human realm, of course. So I jumped in on that, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do something, I may as well do something that's vaguely interesting. So jumped in on that. But the job was just, it ended up just becoming, what they were expecting was just far too ambitious from a couple of artists just out of art school, and the kinds of the displays and the kind of quality they were looking for. I mean, we were artists. I studied sculpture. We were not designers. So we were kind of struggling to get this thing happening, and we were starting to get a little bit despondent. And my friend Ewan, which actually incidentally means yew tree, which is kind of strange. There's a lot of that goes on in this story. He had said to me, listen, I found a way of getting the hell out of this hellish job. The only way we can get our dole money back is to take a job outside of the scheme that's temporary. And it's not knowing to be temporary, but at least we've taken a bona fide job. So if we take that job and we do it for a seasonal planting, it's a tree planting job, he said, it's a seasonal thing. We take the seasonal thing, we can jump on the bus, go up to this godforsaken place up that I'd never been to, up the middle of nowhere on the coast near Thurso, plant a bunch of trees. Apparently you can make 50 quid a day, which in those days seemed like a lot of money to me, 50 quid a day back then.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Back then, of course that ended up not being true, but so, and then we get the bus back, sign on, and go back to making art again. So it seemed like a great plan. So off we went, Ewan and I, up on the bus. And we were taken, once we arrived in Thurso, we were taken to this godforsaken, to me at the time, having been used to Edinburgh, just looked like a barren landscape to me. It looked like a World War I image from the Somme or something. It was just mud everywhere because they were planting these trees. There was all these tree plantations that they were used, for tax dodges for people and things like that. It was all sorts of, speeding the trees up for growth and things. So we were taken to, no idea what the accommodation would be. We're taken to this little area of earth in the middle of off our dirt road by a massive field, with just two caravans on it, two dilapidated, broken down caravans, no windows. Our one had no windows. I think it had some, but they were mostly broken or not existing at all. The door was hanging off the hinges. There was no toilet. There was no running water. There was no light. It was pretty bleak. And to add insult to injury, on the way there, we had driven right past Dounreay nuclear reprocessing plant, which I thought, wow, this is quite the place that we're being taken to. And there was something in that, about in the back of my head, as significant about that I thought, interesting. Being up there in that place somehow had a significance to me, after the Chernobyl disaster the year before. But I wasn't fully consciously aware of that at the time. But that comes into play in a little while. So I think it was quite near the village of Ray. I think you and I had talked about this.
Yeah.
And it was, you said, was it Brood? What was the name of the place?
I don't remember. I'll need to double check again. But there's a forest or a wood. It's just further. It's kind of south of Ray, in the hills south of Ray, roughly. Aye. Can't remember the name yet, but I'll go back and remember it.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there was nothing. The trees didn't exist at that time because we were planting them. So it was just I mean, other forests might have been there, but where we were was very barren. I mean, you couldn't really. I didn't remember.
The funny thing was, sorry to cut you off, but the funny thing was when I heard about your story to start off with, and I kind of thought, trees in Thurso.
Yeah.
That's the unbelievable part of the story.
Yeah, yeah. It is really, isn't it?
That
Yeah.
windswept and stuff like that. So sorry to cut you off there, but that was
No, but it's a good point. It's a good point because that's just not their natural. I mean, that's probably why they had the plant. I mean, I don't know this. I'm guessing maybe that's why they had the plantations more inland.
yeah.
You know, I have no idea how it works, but certainly my memory. I actually went back there something like maybe 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago now to try and find the location. And I mean, I think I did. But what was really interesting is when I did go back, I noticed there were a lot of stone circles and stone recumbent stones and a lot of mounds and mounded earthworks that, of course, as a young man,
Mhm.
I was not, looking for, nor did I understand at that time. So there's a lot more features to the landscape than I had realized as a young man at that time. So anyway, we got dumped off at the caravans, and obviously immediately, your heart sinks because you think, oh my God, what have I got myself into here? And the caravan next to us, they kind of was shuffling around as we arrived, and these three guys emerged, and they were New Zealanders they'd been working in a building site in London, spent all their money on the nightlife, and couldn't get back to New Zealand, so they had find another job. So they found this awful tree planting job along with us, and we're trying to save up for their tickets to get back to New Zealand. At least that's what I remember. So we had some company at least there for a little while. So the ground was frozen at first, so we didn't really have a lot of opportunity to plant. So it was sporadic. We weren't making any money. The planting was actually much more difficult than we had been told. You'd cut this kind of V notch in the earth and then drop the little sapling in, close the V notch. But what the gaffer would do was he'd come around at the end of the day and just pull all the trees out that you hadn't planted right. And you'd have to go back the next day and plant them all again. So you wouldn't get paid for that second time. So there was a bit of a learning curve on it and very frustrating. So you get a couple of days of planting, then it would be cancelled because the ground would be too hard. Then you get a couple of days of planting and so forth. So quite a frustrating time. So in the meantime, we would walk to the village to get food and things like that. So, which is, if I remember rightly, it was a fairly long walk from the site to the village, where there was a phone box at that time, so I could call back to my girlfriend and back home to my parents and let them know how I was doing. So everything was going along, pretty depressing, but it's like anything, you can sort of get used to it. Bunch of hippies appeared in a silver bus on the run from. They were English guys. They were on the run from the law, or at least one of them was from an arrest down in England for some drug charge. So there was a motley crew there eventually of us sitting there. But it was really maybe it's hard to remember exactly how long into this that the event took place, but it was the middle of the night, and it was a very cold there. We had to kind of use polythene bags and tape them together to put over our sleeping bags to try and provide a little bit more heat. It was very, very cold, and we had cheap sleeping bags, and I probably weren't eating very much too, so probably not in a great shape. But so I was lying there in the middle of the night, and I was sleeping, and I woke up clutching at my throat. I couldn't breathe, and it was as if the air pressure inside the caravan had suddenly changed and had become dramatically heavy and almost fluid-like. It was a little bit like being plunged underwater. All of a sudden, it was a very, very disorientating experience of feeling this pressure suddenly around my body, particularly face, throat, and it had a burning. The viscosity of it had a sort of burning quality to it, and a sort of sulfurous quality to it, which was very alarming, to have this feeling of noticing you're being pressurized, going in a panic about that, and then realizing that there was a burning sensation accompanied with it that got more and more pronounced. And at one point, I realized that I wasn't really I was choking, but actually, whatever it was actually entering my body. It felt like this pressurized fluid was actually going inside of my body and going into, through my throat and into my body, which was really, I was in an absolute sheer panic. And immediately, my immediate thought was, oh my God, there's been a nuclear accident, that there has been an accident at Dounreay, and we're all going to die. This is it. We're dying, because the mind tries to make sense of these things, and
Totally.
you know, it was on my mind, the nuclear thing. I'd passed Dounreay. That was very much on my mind, and everybody was aware of we were all feeling a little insecure about that. So that was a logical place in the middle of a panic to go to, if you could even use the word logic. So of course that was happening, but there were odd things going on that where this pressure was actually as if entering into my body. So it started to feel like my interior was being crushed. And that's where things started to get really, really weird for me. I thought, I was realizing that I was being crushed, almost like every cell was being compressed. It's a very, very hard feeling to describe, and I've never really been successful at fully been able to describe this. But like every cell in your body was actually going through a compression at the same time. And it was about at that point where I sensed an intelligence, I sensed an awareness to this compressive force, that it was behaving in an intelligent way. And the intelligence was not just inside of my body somehow, it was also around the caravan, in the air, and surrounding me. And that was terrifying, to feel that there was an intelligence to this process that was orchestrating something that was causing me an enormity of suffering. So I began to kind of realize that this presence it was almost like it was circling, like an animal, kind of circling the caravan. That was my interpretation at the time.
Were you in this van yourself, or was your friend in this van with you?
This is the interesting thing that I'll get to in a little bit. Was Ewan was across the other side of the caravan, sleeping there. Of course, I had lost all awareness of him, of the caravan. I was simply in this space of being compressed in this kind of sulphurous burning sort of atmosphere. But there was the pressure continued to increase to such an extent that it became there's a realization. I think that any organism realizes when it's under threat. All organisms realize this on some really deep level, and for me there was a realization that this was an untenable situation, that there was no way that there was going to be a good outcome to this, that it was actually potentially I was going to die. And it was interesting how quick that thought came, because it was so dramatic and so extreme. But this density continued and continued for quite a bit further. It's hard to estimate how long this actually took place. But at one point, I remember sort of finding my way to the floor of the caravan and realizing that somehow some part of me realized or wanted to confront or somehow get some kind of contact with this being, some way of understanding what the agency, what the intelligence was that was causing the suffering. And I remember getting to the door and the thing was off the hinges and trying to peer into the darkness. Of course, there was nothing to see, but just this all-pervasive intelligence, this incredible, powerful intelligence, something that, of course, I'd never encountered before. So the density continued to the point where I felt myself almost, the only way to describe this is as if I was turned inside out, as if the intensity had become so extreme that the only place to go for my consciousness was out. It was the exit point, what it seemed like to me, almost as though I was ejected out of matter, like sort of ejected beyond the realm of matter into whatever kind of space one could imagine. And it was a disembodied space, no question, that I'd entered. And I, to myself, even thinking back now, I was aware that this was a place that had a depth to it, that there was a place here that I could travel into, and that it was preferable than the compression that I had been involved in, or I had been subjected to. So I felt myself being kind of drawn further into this space that felt actually quite vast, almost billowy. So I felt as though I was being kind of, my consciousness was being turned and moved and shifted and shaped. It was actually quite, there was an element of comfort to it compared to what I had just experienced. And there was an acceptance at that moment of death, of there's no return to an incarnate space. This is, this is the equivalent of dying here. And there was a strange, calm acceptance of that, actually, which was really amazing how dramatic an experience can be on the one hand, and yet there's this acceptance of death on the other hand. I think the organism knows when it's done. So as I was passing through, and obviously disembodied at this point, passing through this place, I felt it was almost as if the only way I can describe this was like the intelligence of that being, of that, what I call the sulfur demon now, the intelligence of that being reaching into this realm of death, if you like, and saying, oh no, and almost as though it had grabbed me and hauled me back into this more embodied place of suffering. So I felt this drawing back, this kind of painful sort of pulling of a ripping, actually, sensation of being ripped back into this realm of matter, and whereby the pain continued at the same, if not worse. And there was a kind of stillness. There was a point where everything went to a pause. And when I write about this or talk about it, it's a little bit like imagining a prey, but imagining something like a serpent, like a cobra, some kind of animal that it has a fast strike coming into that point of balance before it makes the final strike against its prey, like a bird of prey or something like that. There's a still point there. There's a moment of pregnancy. There's a moment of presence, of stillness. So being in that stillness, I thought, well, I'm about to experience something else that, to me was also equivalent to death. But just as that was about to happen, and that was a feeling of power and presence and immense presence, immense power and stillness, there was an enormous bang, enormous clapping sound, like a thunderous kind of sound. And I was returned to I think I must have been somewhere halfway up or something, but I was back on the floor, realizing that I'm still actually in a body. There was still something of a body there. I had first not very little sensation of it. The burning sensation started to dissipate. And I began to realize, and I was able to move my fingers gradually, move my toes, realize that actually my body was actually still intact, despite what had seemed to have happened to me. And the immediate response was emotion of intense crying and release, and finally crawling back into the sleeping bag. Just with sheer exhaustion, I think I must have eventually fallen asleep. And in the morning, I looked around. Everything was normal. Ewan was already up and he was brewing some tea. He's already smoking his morning joint, which he did perpetually, and was brewing some tea. And I, felt exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And I went and sat next to him on the little caravan table, these old fashioned caravans, a wee table. And I said to him, did anything weird happen for you last night? Was there anything odd happening? So, he was like, what? And I said, did you get something come and visit you, or did something come at you in the caravan? He said, well, you mean, like a ghost or something? He was kind of making light of it. And I said, no. And then I thought, you know what? It's just, I didn't have the words at that time to describe. And he just kind of he didn't really pursue it. It was just like, well, maybe he had a bad dream or something.
Mhm.
So I remember after that, I thought, okay, I'm going outside. There was a little bit of snow, and I thought, I'm going outside because if there was something there, in your naivety, you think to yourself, there has to be some kind of evidence. Of course, when I was a very young man at the time, I think if I think back now, what age would I have been? 23 years old, just out of art college. So I'm out there looking for footprints, thinking, in my mind that there must be some evidence. Of course, I found absolutely nothing in the snow. And there was a darkness after that. There was a dampening
Mhm.
on my being from that moment. What had happened? What the hell was that? Nobody else. The New Zealanders seemed fine. Ewan was fine. What was that? What on earth was that? And we didn't last too much longer at that planting because it was too much hard work, and a couple of art students are not fit for. The New Zealanders were in better shape than us. They were working on a building site. We were pretty pathetic, not really very physical. So eventually we just chucked it, and they chucked it too, actually, the New Zealanders. But we went back to Edinburgh, and I was just not right. I was not right, and I've written about this in the book. There's a lot more detail about this in the memoir, which eventually will be published. But there's a lot more, dialogue with my girlfriend at the time. She was concerned about, trying to tell people what had happened, and realizing that people just would, they couldn't even take it in. They couldn't. It was like there was nobody really able to listen adequately to that story. It just felt like you were an insane person to even bring it up. So there was a lot of bottling up, a lot of trying to manage that myself, and that was tough. Trying to, internalize that, figure it out with no language. I didn't know anything about the occult. I was interested in Marxism at the time, Marxist aesthetics. I was in my head reading these intensely philosophical books on aesthetics. That was my trajectory as an artist. It's not that I hadn't been a sensitive kid, because I was. I mean, I was an artist. I was always very gifted as a creative being. But the whole notion of the occult is a different thing. It's a different trajectory. It's a whole different. I had no clue, and I got iller, more and more ill. I started to smell burning, and the burning was coming from me. It was coming from my skin. My hair started to fall out. My skin turned a kind of strange yellow color. I was not looking very good. My balance started to go. I couldn't tell if the ground was moving beneath my feet or stationary. It was a very, very, very dark time. I started to see what I call in the book breaches in space, where I might be talking to you right now here, but actually behind me in this room, I would have no idea of the depth that was behind me. I would have a sense of an enormity of a vista that was dark and going endlessly behind me and threatening to either pull me in or, sort of suck me in, basically. I'd often have these what I call bifurcated experiences, where I would always be perceiving, and I mean, this is a schematized way of looking at it, but it's almost like you take a line between two eyes, really, and you're seeing one reality with one eye and another with another eye. It's not exactly how it happened, but that's the only way I can describe it. It was almost like a polarization of vision. So I would be actually beholding something dark and endless with strange forms to it, and yet seeing this world simultaneously, and having to try and bring these two worlds together in everyday experience, which was actually painful. It was actually created physical pain. So emotional pain, of course, psychological pain, with a lot of physical pain. So my body began to really lose its tolerance. There was a lot of, pains that people could talk about that would be associated with all kinds of other inflammatory diseases, or, Lyme disease, all of these kinds of things. So I was in really, really bad shape. I was losing weight. My muscle mass was falling away from me. I didn't really have an awful lot to start. I've always been quite a slight person, but I was losing muscle mass that I could not afford to lose. And bear in mind, this is a young man who's in the prime of life,
Mhm.
going downhill really, really fast. And people were beginning to notice. That's when people began to notice. Um, Even although now I'll talk to people about it now, I've tried to, you do research and you try and go back and speak to people and they're like, yeah, I knew you were struggling, but gosh, I didn't realize it was that bad for you. I hadn't realized you were going, it was particular. So, you don't really know what people are, people are perceiving you during these kinds of events. You feel like death. You imagine everybody sees you that way.
Mhm.
But, you talk to many people who are ill, and, in my practice, I see this a lot. And, you know, people manage with intolerable illnesses, and the rest of the world might not really know it so well. And also, it's a survival strategy. I mean, you're to let out too much, to let too much away, to let too much out the bag, it kind of weakens you, makes you more fragile, because then you get judged, and all of that happens.
Absolutely, yeah.
You might be insane. In my case, you're crazy. And at the time, I was working with a non-profit, an arts non-profit in Edinburgh, with adults with mental illness.
Mhm.
So I was actually working with adults with highly complicated mental health issues while I was going through this. So it was like a living hell on many kind of levels. Um, and eventually I couldn't work anymore. I was struggling I couldn't get to work on time. I never got to work on time. I was starting to get in trouble. I was not paying bills. I was struggling with everything. Everything became an impossibly difficult task. The smell of burning was following me everywhere. It was almost like the presence of that being hadn't left me. There was an imprint to that presence that I just couldn't shake, and it was destroying me slowly. So I remember asking for a job share. I said to my boss, I can't do this anymore. And it was then I had to tell him the story. He said, well, I can't. I know you're struggling, but I want to try and understand. And he was a great guy. He's a Dutch guy. And it was way out of his comfort zone, but he tried his best to
Mhm.
understand. Here's this young person trying to articulate a story. So I told him the story, and he said to me, I can't, honestly, it seems insane to me. I can't make head nor tail of it, but I believe you.
Mhm.
He believed me, which was really important to me at that time. So he took it to the board of directors, and I'll move on after this because this is an interesting little juxtaposition here. He took it to the board of directors, who said, um, he sounds crazy. We need to have him assessed. So ironically, I had to go to the Royal Edinburgh Hospital and be assessed by the head psychiatrist, who happened to have been a member of the board on the organization I was working for. So it was really, really odd to be going into an office and having my sanity assessed.
Mhm.
And all the guy that he had, he was an art lover. He was interested. Obviously, that's why he'd been on the board of this directors, and he had images of Dutch landscapes behind him on a cork board in his
Mhm.
office. And he said he tested me on my knowledge of art. Basically, that was his way of deciding my sanity. This painting, and he pulled postcards off and handed them to me. Who's this? Luckily, I knew actually enough for him to be satisfied, and he just kind of washed his hands of me. It was clearly like, this guy's not mad.
Mhm.
And so therefore I was able to cut my hours down and begin to manage. Now that's when I met this woman who realized I couldn't live alone in Edinburgh. She
Mhm.
showed up one day with a bunch of cardboard boxes. Wonderful woman, children's book illustrator, who's now a midwife down in Bristol. So she showed up at my house, a bunch of boxes, and moved me out to East Lothian.
Mhm.
And that was where I was first introduced to the yew tree. And this woman had said to me, look, I was not going out. She said very much. She said, I'd like you to go out. This friend of mine, he's a tree surgeon. He's going to take you to the pub, introduce you to some people, make you some, you could do with some friends out here.
Mhm.
So we went to the pub. There was a lock-in the pub. You know how it goes. I was, still a relatively young man at the time. I hadn't been drinking alcohol, which I had actually been doing to try and negate some of the effects of my illness. So I had been abusing alcohol a little bit as well at that time. So she'd helped me clean up a bit. So I'd gone down there, and we ended up going up to the tree about 3 in the morning. It was a very bright moon that night, and going through this old estate, this old Victorian estate, where the grass, it hadn't been kept. The grass was waist high at places. It was like a world I had never encountered. And you know, my descriptions of it in the book are kind of juxtaposed to a working class person's understanding of Scotland. You know, of the Scotland that I knew was concrete, no trees, barely any lawns. When we moved to our place we moved to, we didn't even have grass. It was just mud. The grass was just seeded at the time. You know, it was a kind of a rough environment. And you know, to go to this Victorian opulence and to be going through this grass and then to come to this shape that was this giant black shape. And the tree surgeon said, okay, here we are. This is the yew. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? I'm exhausted. I need to just rest. And he's a strong guy. He just got a hold of me and he pushed me through this hole, essentially, which was quite low. So I had to crouch. And suddenly I'm in a cold tunnel. And I think, what on earth is this? And I'm moving through this tunnel. It's cold. Every time I try and stand up, I get pierced by branches. I realize it's branches. It's a tree of some kind. So after about 40 feet, I'm going through this tunnel. I have to basically walk hunched over. So eventually I find these metal rails, pull myself through these old rails, and I realize I can stand up. And in the light of the moon, I see that I'm in a chamber. This looks like there's one way in and one way out, and that's where I've just been. And in the center, I see a column. And I think, gosh. So I walk over, it's the trunk of the yew. And I look up and I see that all the branches are growing from about 12, 15 feet up. And they're growing in these great arches, like cathedral arches, down back to the floor again, and then continuing, and then forming what looks like a peripheral forest that's sealing in this space. So I realize I'm inside this chamber, this kind of what I now describe as a kind of inverted cauldron, you know, of a branch, an inverted cauldron of branch contortion, or whatever you want to call it. So of course, I touched the yew, and I had this feeling that it's an immense feeling of familiarity, and a feeling that I've come home, I've arrived. I'm home. And I couldn't explain it at the time, but I just knew somehow I was home. And this was familiar territory to me. So he kind of came in afterwards, explained a little bit about what this being was, how old it was, that it was female, that it was a female expressed tree, which was kind of mind-boggling to me. And the next morning, I knew that I needed to go back there. And I went back, and that's where a whole new set of experiences began that led over a 9.5 to 10 years period, sort of between 93 and 2003, to a period of healing and actually learning and experiencing a number of beings associated with that yew that were actual teacher beings, which is a very strange thing to say, but that, you know, other people refer to as the shining ones, or you know, Tuatha or whatever you want to call them, you know. But these were beings of intelligence that I felt were reconstructing me to a certain extent and helping me to regain my health, and in a different way, though, in a way that was somehow different. You know, it doesn't mean anything powerful. You know, there's no claim to anything like that. In many ways, going through all the experiences I went through made me 100 times more vulnerable in a lot of ways. So there's a kind of sensory surface that was developed that allows one to see and to sense in a more of a clairvoyant fashion. But there's also a vulnerability that comes with that. It's not some Superman type of power. It's quite the reverse. So there was a lot of managing vulnerability as that part of that healing process as well, and being able to learn to live with that. So I'll pause there because there's a whole other multiple chapters of that healing process that took place after that. So I'll pause to let you.
I've got a lot of questions. Yeah, so that's great. It's a totally amazing story and really interesting. Going back to the caravan.
Yeah.
And in regards to like a few questions in that. So when this entity type, whatever you call it, the sulfur demon, now you call it that, or is that what you call it now?
Yeah.
You didn't at any point see structure to it, or did you feel structure to it, or
Yeah, the structure was the to me was the transformation of the air, was the density.
Mhm.
The density had an the density and the intelligence were the same thing. It was almost as though the structure was the mind of the being,
Mhm.
that it had control of matter, it had control of elementally of what was around it.
Mhm.
So it was a fluid being, though. It wasn't like a kind of a geometric type of, sort of quantum type of stuff. I mean, that's just information. This was a living type of a living being, a sort of fluidic being whose mind was the very pressure that it was exerting.
Wait, when you, I'd say, at that point you left your body to go to some other place, or do you think that your own consciousness made that happen, or do you think this thing expelled your consciousness from your body? What do you think?
Good question. It's a good question. That I pondered that for a long, long time, and you know, things change. One's interpretation changes as you get older and you start to see things, understand things differently. Now I feel that being needed to destroy the matter of my body in a sense and eject me out of. In order to do that, I had to be ejected out, so that in some ways, so that I wouldn't die. What I thought was death probably in a sense was the early stages of death, in a way that I was pushed into. But there was something around there's something around experiencing the death of matter in myself.
Mhm.
Somehow I needed to experience that. It was like a teaching, somehow, that I needed to experience the death of matter, not just for myself, but the death of matter, period. What that meant. And somehow over the years, I managed to be able to link that to, I don't want to go into that right now unless you really want to, but the whole notion of nuclear fission and the way that human beings have created new states of matter by that nuclear process, matter that didn't exist before. It was almost as though the demon was showing me a level of matter that was below the threshold of spirit, something that had fallen into a dark place, that needed to somehow be worked with, or needed, and I needed to experience it, but in my own body. So there's more to say about that, but that's maybe all I'll say for now around that.
Do you think that this thing was um, generated from that place where you were? You think it was part and parcelly? It was something to do with the time and place, or do you think it was you particularly? No, regardless of where you would be. So do you think it was to do with the place, or partly to do with the place, or do you think it was yourself, it was the target, or do you think it was opportunistic because
I
you were
think
in the place?
good. Yeah, these are great questions. I think it was specific to the location, but I also think that there was a certain relationship to me that was specific too. So I think I was probably drawn to be there, in a way that I'll probably never comprehend. But that being, I'm certain, was specific to that location.
Mm.
And when I've been writing about it and thinking about it over the years and trying to, you know, communicating as best I can with that experience, and where it went from there. My sense is that that being was neither. It wasn't an evil being.
Mm.
It was a being. I feel now very strongly that was, best way to describe it would be like an ancient guardian of the earth,
Mm.
like an ancient intelligence that when I was onto it, I think when I was describing the kind of sulfur aspect to it, it was almost as though it was a being that had existed on the ancient earth before the earth became what it is today, and somehow that being had become immersed into the earth's development as a kind of a guardian. Um, and I suspect that there are others of these kinds of beings, but I have a feeling that, again, this is my working hypothesis, that the being had come to the surface, if you like, in response to events maybe that were going on in the world at that time around nuclear fission and around the Chernobyl the year before, because we know that a lot of particulates had come over Scotland and over the Western Isles,
Mm.
for
Totally.
example. So we were part of that, and not in it needed, it could have been elsewhere, but we were still in that vicinity. But I have a feeling Now that might change. Maybe I'll be given some revelations that will change that. But right now, in as limited a way as as we all are, that's my best get. That's my best hypothesis, that that being was somehow linked to the area, and somehow linked as a guardian, and somehow linked to actually Dunray in some way.
That kind of, for some of the kind of what you spoke about there, it kind of answered some of the question that I was going to answer next. Sorry, ask next. Did your opinion change of this entity through time? Like maybe when you maybe were younger and this maybe happened, did you see it maybe as potentially evil then, and then as time go on, you maybe seen it as a teaching or a kind of a learning or kind of showing you something?
Yeah, great comment. I think yes, it changed. I mean, I was brought up a Catholic, and although I resisted it constantly, it wasn't just not a good match for me. But it still gets to you, and I think that notion of evil was in there somewhere for me as a young man. That why me? Why had I been punished like that? Why did I have to go through that when I should have been in my prime? I was struggling with my health. I mean, why? I'd look around me and I was very envious of other people, who were able to do things that I couldn't do at that time.
Hmm.
So as I got older and I started to realize that, my gosh, there's languages out there that can help me to understand this. The language of healing was one, but the language of the occult was another. And I began to study, and I began to do a lot of research, and I began to see my own experience reflected in slightly different ways. But I began to see, there's something here that's not just personal. There's something here that's personal, but there's something here that's also transpersonal. Something about a process. Something here that is more than just about me. Whether I was looking through Irish mythology or Welsh mythological material, whether I was looking in Sumerian material, whether I was, looking at things clairvoyantly myself, however it was, I began to do multiple kinds of research to try and understand it. So yeah, my sense changed, and the notion of evil sort of dropped away quite a bit.
Yes.
And the sense that came was more like, there was a sort of two processes there. There was a one of destruction. It's a simplistic way of putting it. This is not necessarily how I would write about it, but for the time we have, it was like more of a process of destruction, and then this process with the U of actual reconstruction and rebuilding and healing. So it felt like there was two polarity there that was.
When you went back and you said there was potentially some earthworks there as well, in that area. So did you not see them at the time when you were there prior, when you were doing the work there and stuff? But you see that after there was earthworks there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, as I said to you, I was not. I was amazed actually when I went back with what I know now. Just those few years ago, I was shocked actually at how different it was. The landscape was to my memory of it.
Yeah.
There were way more features than I'd seen it as this flat, as I said to you at the beginning of this landscape that was like the Somme or something like this, awful trenches where you're planting trees, and it was mud everywhere, as far as the eye could see. But it wasn't like that at all when I went. It must have just, your younger perspective. But I went back, there were little windy roads with earthworks, mounds, clackeries, mostly recumbent stones that you actually would have to kind of get out the car and, what's that there? Having an eye for it, as you know yourself, where you start to get an eye for these features in the landscape, and you start to read it like a map. You read it as a text, and you get skilled at that. You get very skilled. I've had a similar experience here in the USA of reading the landscape here, which is utterly fascinating, by the way. The level of stoneworks and earthworks here round where I am. There's a balanced rock right near my house, for example, that is probably from 5,000 BCE. So there's immense things. So you can learn to read these things. So I think I was clueless about that when I was 23.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When you, I noticed that obviously you didn't really divulge it to much people, obviously, because it's mid-80s. You know what I mean? It's hard even these days to talk about. It's a lot more accepted to talk about things these days, but back then it's understandably quite hard to talk to anybody, and also about the work you were doing as well at the time, which made it even more difficult for you. So when after that, when you this kind of lady kind of took you under her shoulder type thing and supported you, and then when this tree surgeon took you to the yew tree, did he have a good understanding of obviously the mysteries involved with it as well and stuff, or was it just part and parcel of that? Did he know um, what he was doing in that sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does make sense. Yeah, yeah. I've often wondered what was going on for him because he was you know tree surgeon. He had some botanical knowledge, and he understood the morphology of the yew, so he appreciated that tree deeply. That's why he wanted to take me
Mm.
to the tree. There was other circumstances around that, but I won't go into that just now. But he was very, very impressed by the yew and called it a wonder of the world. I distinctly remember him saying, "Welcome to a hidden wonder of the world." He was proud to take people there,
Mm.
and I think, in some level, he was one of these people that we meet a lot. And this is not a judgment, because this is just the way it is. That we see somebody having a trajectory to their life. They're actually quite a sensitive person, but they've not really had circumstances around them that have really allowed that to be supported. So they kind of have it, but they have to keep a cap on it. So I think he was a sort of sensitive man, but he couldn't let that out. He was a man in a man's world.
Yeah.
I knew a lot of the guys, and they were all beer swilling big dudes who it was all about the usual conversations that these kinds of guys have. So yeah, but I think he had a sensitivity to it, but not to the level that I couldn't really share with him anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but he did have an estimate of the age. He did understand how old that tree was. That it was, to him, was way over 1,000 years old, and that was controversial at the time. My personal belief is it's much, much older than that.
Mm.
But nowadays there's a kind of conservative streak to understanding yews that's going on, that's trying to be more scientific, and I support it to a certain extent. But what it's done is it's kind of pulled down the ages of the yews that people have surmised them to be. So I won't even go into what I think it is, but let's say that this guy Bob thought it was 1,000 or more years old, but I suggest way older. However, the old lord, going back to the opulence of this place, this is a Victorian walled state, a state that was very rich at the time, owned by the Balfours,
Mm.
and Lord Balfour was still
Oh,
alive. It's called Whittingham Estate.
right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and Lord Balfour was still alive at that time. So I got to know Lord Balfour because he was friendly with a woman who had kind of brought me to that area. So I got to know him, and he was quite a character, because he could tell you stories about the yew that he remembered from youth and things like that. But he was convinced the yew was only about 700 years old or things like that. So they more conventional sort of understandings. But yeah.
So when you had the initial visit there, and what drew you to keep coming back to it? And did you feel it was cleansing or healing you, or um, making a difference to your life in that sense to make you go back? So what kind of brought you there and make you keep coming back?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's a big that's a big piece, actually, because there was a compelling to go back to the tree.
Mm.
And at first I wasn't entirely sure what that involved, but there was it was almost like a speech from the yew into my blood. It was almost like being spoken to into your blood, like a command.
Mm.
You shall come to see me. I'm pulling you, sort of not entirely involuntary, but close to that,
Mm.
to the point where I would have to go. I would be, it was almost like this kind of irritation in my blood that would pull me, and I would have to go to the U, whether it was nighttime or daytime. So yeah, there was a compelling in the blood, and the blood became a vector. The blood became a kind of a surface that started to get worked on under the U. It was as though the U was able to kind of speak into my blood in a way that was actually healing ultimately, and transformative. So a lot of the teaching I do now in the Yew Mysteries is we work a little bit with our blood etherically, not physically, but we work with our blood the point of view of our awareness of it. So it brought a lot of principle into
Mm.
my teaching, and of course it was the primary vector of my healing. So yeah.
So we're after the healing, and then obviously what gave you the drive to want to show other people or to help other people or to kind of push forward with this for yourself? I mean, to bring it out to other people. What was the kind of driving force behind that for you as well?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the of course the experiences of the 9 years had to be unfolded first. So there was first 3 years were seizures. Next 3 years was a different tone of sort of more teacher beings. Last 3 years more of a sort of consolidation period where I was beginning to actually regain, or my health was different. I felt as though I had kind of a different body than I had before. So after that, um, my visual art had kept me going, kept me sane actually
Mm.
during some of that time. Doing drawings from the East Lothian landscape, for example, helped my perception as well, because my perception was so fractured that orienting to the horizon while I was drawing was actually quite healing for me.
Mm.
And that has become a principle too. So I write about that. That's actually quite a complex thing that I write about a lot in the book, actually, about what the function of the horizon, what is the horizon and how does it function.
Mm.
So anyway, that aside, I was working a lot with the drawing, and a friend of mine had said to me, look, your drawings she liked my drawings, let's just say. There's this prize thing that is, and I'm answering the question, but I have to go a little bit in a circuitous way. I hope you don't mind.
That's fine. That's fine.
And so, long story short, she encouraged me to apply for this a landscape painting prize,
Mm.
or scholarship, you might want to call it, in the north of Vermont, USA. And I thought, why would I? I mean, I've not had any track record. I've been sick all these years. There's all these hungry artists who've got shows here, shows there, selling work right, left, and center. They're going to dive on this thing, and I've got absolutely not a chance in hell of getting it. I got it.
Mm.
Bizarrely enough, I won it. So I ended up in Vermont, met a woman there who's my life had changed a lot, and the other person was no longer with me.
Mm.
I'd been on my own for a while, and then going to the USA, I met this woman who ended up becoming my wife. She was American,
Mm.
or she is American, and she came to live in Scotland for 6 months. Was going to come and live with me in Scotland. There was an immigration issue at the airport with her coming back too many times in the year,
Mm.
so she got booted out. We had to make the decision: do we let it go, or what? I had to move to the USA,
Mm.
basically. So when I moved to the USA, and I felt the you behind this, it was quite, for me, it was like, what? Why would this happen? I'm just getting my health back. I'm just finding my way again. But I got this kind of communication from the you, not in a word language, but more in a visceral language that I've come to understand. The you speaks in a way that's not new age nonsense kind of speaking, messages. It's none of that nonsense. It's a much deeper kind of visceral experience that then you have to kind of try and work with. It's a challenge with the you. It's not simplistic. It's not giving you in a simple message type of format. Although there are a few people now who are trying to do that, and that's a whole other thing. But we'll leave that for now. So I the Yew had sort of said, I will be here for, this is my interpretation, I will be here for thousands of years more. You will not. I need you to go and take some of this into the world, which is my interpretation of it, you know. So it seems really grandiose, and that's, you know, way beyond what capacity I had. Came to the US and started to get, people were curious. Oh, you know, who's this person? We moved to an intentional, like into a kind of pagan community, which I'd never experienced before, that kind of world. So we moved, well, I had a little bit in Scotland with the Beltane Fire Festival. I knew some people from that. I was making connections, but I was very isolated, but I was making connections. So, but this was a bigger kind of connection to this big pagan community in New England, who sort of embraced me really quickly. Very, very, very loving and very quickly embraced me. I think as a Scottish person too, you're quickly embraced. You know, they want to know my story. They want to understand it. And they asked me if I'd like to come and teach at their events, you know. And I'm thinking, teach what? You know, so all I could do was tell the story at that time. I had nothing to teach. I had nothing to say other than the story and the way I told it at that time, you know. So I would told this story, and gradually other people would invite me to do things. I got invited to write for magazines, shamanic magazines. People got to know about me. And gradually I was kind of called further and further to actually show up, basically, you know, and make sense. And finally, probably it was about 2014 or so, I was invited to go to Wales and teach at a circle of Yews by great friends of mine, David and Emma, who are plant medicine people, very prominent plant medicine people in the UK now in different places. But and they asked me to do a day on the Yew. And it was a circle of 12 Yews in a place called Llanfoigen or Llanfagen or something like that. I've lost the pronunciation. But and that was quite successful. And then we decided that they would want to bring me back, and they asked me if I could maybe try and structure for a couple of days, and then we structured and out of that came this Yew Mysteries training that I was able to start to build. Now there's actually a 720-page transcription of that work now, which
good to know.
Yeah, this is, I mean, you know, we're the Scots, we can talk, right? I mean, and you know, some of the work was done in Seattle, and believe it or not, there are Yews there. Not as old, obviously, but some that are quite old further out on the Olympic Peninsula. So I started to bring the work even here in the US, not just in Wales, not just in Scotland. And there was a following, small following. I'm talking small numbers here. The Yew just attracts the people that she wants to herself. It's not like a big thing. And one of the people there, a lot of people are very dedicated, and one wanted to transcribe all of it. She recorded everything and coordinated me going there and then transcribed it. So there's now this kind of big 720-page transcription of all of this stuff. So and you see when you look at that how much principle and how much has come out of the experience. So it's quite heartening to see that. So one day that'll become a book of some kind too, but I'm not there yet. You know. So.
Going back to the history of it. I mean, because I've never really been aware of it in the past. And was there types of followings in the past with the Yew as well? So what can you discuss with that?
Great. I mean, you're asking all the perfect questions here, and I think filling the gaps, and it's really important. You know, at first, of course, I had no idea about how deep the Yew is in our history. And it turns out that it's absolutely massive. It penetrates almost every aspect of who we are, to places, names of rivers, names of hills, names of towns. You know, it's quite extraordinary how where it shows up. So I began to see that there was that a lot of places in the UK were named after the Yew. York, for example, in England, was known as Romanized as it was Eboracum from the original, their version of the original language, and Eboracum means Yew stronghold. So what's kind of interesting is that New York City is actually New Yew City, and you've got York, and and there's a multitude of rivers and hills and things like that named after them. And a friend of mine, Janice Fry, who I met through my work, we were put together. Very few of us, more people now interested in the Yew through her work, my work, and a few of others, because we've been doing this for a long time. Janice for almost 40 years now or more. Mm-hmm. Janice has written some books on the Yew where she's actually tracing back that we had UK, parts of Europe were filled with Yew tribes, absolutely filled with Yew tribes, that the Yew was the sacred tree, was the sacred plant, and we were really led by it. Mm-hmm. And that I've even kind of heard, it's not been fully verified, I haven't found full verification of this, but in the mystery schools at Alexandria, that these Yew mysteries were studied because they wanted to preserve them. So these were looked at even apparently there. And of course, when all the mystery schools went underground, with Christianity, then of course the Yew mysteries also themselves. So I often say to people that in a way, one can never go back and recreate something as it was, but you can be ignited to bring principles back with a new consciousness mm-hmm. to interface with them. We can't have the consciousness that people had 2,000 years ago. It's not applicable to a modern human being. For us, it would be an illness to have that consciousness. We have a consciousness that we have now that we have to manage in a certain way. And so my job in a way was to take these mysteries through myself mm-hmm. and sort of reshape them in a way that could be comprehended by a modern human being, mm-hmm. which is me. I'm the representative of that. I'm the one who's here having to try and do this. So I often say to people that we're reinventing something for the modern world that was lost 2,000 years ago. So, and I stand by that. People are like, gosh, how ridiculous. But no, my experience informs me that there's a shape, or there's a language there that needed to be shaped for modern times,
And that's the information's there. It's just tapping into it. I mean, that's it.
Information's there, but it's not static, right? I mean, the information is there, but we have to interface with it in a way that's appropriate to our consciousness. Mm-hmm. Clairvoyance itself changes. We can't expect to have a download, and people use that word a lot, and in the New Age parlance, but that's not how it works. I mean, you have to actually shape yourself to be able to work with that, as and a lot of the principles that in the Yew mysteries are about how do we work with our consciousness and our embodiment in a way that can provide us with new kinds of sensory organs where we can, when we go to a Yew, we can understand its language. You can't approach a Yew through your nervous system and through a grasping type of experience where you want information. I say you, I mean generally one. Yeah. I hear that a lot of, people want an experience or desperate for an experience, but actually what they mostly get is just a reflection of what they wanted. So I mean, you have to let that go. Your consciousness has to be breathed by something else. And that's the job working with the Yew. You have to make way for its consciousness, not in a passive way, but in a way where you're actually shaping that and working with that and coming into contact with it. It's all about surfaces with the Yew. What surface can you develop in an embodied way that can actually be receptive to the language and the voice of the Yew? So that's the kind of work we've been doing now. So it's like, I call them living mysteries. I say to people that, well, the Yew mysteries are a little bit different in a way because they're still alive. Because the sentinels who guard these mysteries are still alive on our planet. Mm-hmm. And these ancient sentinels are still there. And when you walk into a Yew space, it changes your consciousness. If you're open to that, I mean, the Yew gives off an hallucinogenic toxin from its bark and its needles and everything. So you're actually, particularly one where I was in, which was a fully enclosed space, mm-hmm. you're actually entering a space which is actually mind-altering, literally. Now, the tests have really not been done on that. The chemical analysis hasn't been properly done on that, other than anecdotal stories of, people who could be respected in society, like a Japanese doctor who felt funny after being under his yew trees. But, my word would not be taken seriously scientifically. And there's not been any as far as I know, not been any scientific study of the actual hallucinogenic qualities.
Mhm.
But it's been mentioned in many places. It's not just me. So there's a power there to alter the mind.
How how widespread is it across the world?
Well, once would have been really massive. Now, I often say there's a link between the yew and the iron. And if you follow the iron belt across the earth, you'll see a lot of locations of yews, interestingly. But North America has some small yews. Mexico has yews. Pacific Northwest has yews. Sumatra has yews. As far south as Sumatra. India, um, uh, quite much of Europe, of course. Um, Turkey, the Black Sea Basin has one of the highest yew stands, the highest density of yew stands in the world. So they're around, and we've been suffering now a little bit from the cure for cancer, as you probably know. In the '60s, the National Cancer Institute here in the USA, when they were doing these extensive studies of many kinds of substances, plants, and things to see which would bear fruit, so to speak.
Yeah.
The yew they realized was a potential cure for certain kinds of cancer. So for a while there, they were a tree that had been cut down mercilessly in the US as a trash tree became then a tree that was coveted.
Mhm.
And at one point, it was taking the bark of 6 yews for one person's cancer treatment a year.
Mm. God, it's a lot.
So now they synthesize it through yew needles. So now you have these yew plantations which are genetically accelerated to grow quickly. So there's a diminishing of the gene pool there. So there's some concerns around that. But now at least it's synthesized from the needles and the trees are not being cut. But India lost about 90% of its yews from the demand for taxanes for the wealthy world's cancer treatments. So, there's a bigger message there. There's a bigger picture there. The yew is certainly a being that's not out of danger.
Mhm.
And I still hear of, for example, there's lots of churches in Wales that have yews around them. The churches are no longer tenable; they're being sold off privately.
Mhm.
It suddenly becomes down to the owner what to do with the yews. So there, we're in a danger zone about the yews here, and more protections we can put on them, the better. And that's what the Ancient Yew Group are doing. A friend of mine, Paul Greenwood, he's been very, very active as a founder member and also trying to protect these trees. And I salute their work. I'm not part of that, but they probably would all think I was completely crazy. But they are out there protecting the trees now, trying to work in partnership with the churches. So when the church tries to get do its own hackneyed work on, that yew branch needs cut, and they have no idea what they're doing. So they'll call in a local tree surgeon who has no idea, and the whole thing is a mess. So now they have to consult, I think, in certain areas. Don't quote me on that. I mean, I'd have to give you the details, but there's certain partnerships with the church. So anyway, there's a good piece of information there. I think that the yew is not out of danger.
When I was asking the question about how widespread it is in regards to obviously the use, but is it as widespread with the sensitivities towards the yew in terms of what people feel about it and things like that? Is that widespread throughout other cultures as well as a European, maybe North American thing?
So are you saying that the if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that is there the same awareness
Yes, yes.
of the right?
How
Yeah.
special or how special they are, or is there same
Yes, yeah,
widespread
yeah.
thing?
It's variable. In Japan, the yew is called the god tree. It's named in Japan. So Japan's still largely a pagan. It's just it's not Christianized. So there's still this great protection. They have protection over their ancient yews, and they regard it as very sacred. The emperor has a yew staff, for example, in Japan. So and you see that's an old that you can see in the ancient world, in the Irish stories and the Welsh stories. You start to see the yew show up every place. So we had it, but elsewhere, I've heard that in Mexico, the contacts I've made who've come to the Yew Mysteries. What's great about teaching is people come who can give you information. So people in Mexico have talked about places that are regarded as quite sacred in Mexico, and so there are other places, but it's few and far between. Few and far between. So I wouldn't say it was a widespread awareness
Mm.
of its sacredness.
Mm.
Definitely not. But I might be wrong. You know.
That's really interesting, though. It totally is. I actually find it fascinating. In regards to so if people want to find your website or find any information about you, where can they find you?
They can find me on yewmysteries.com, which is YEW as in you, mysteries.com. And, you know, the website is a little static at right now because of the last few years, but, you know, it will begin to look more dynamic. But there's some wonderful photographs there, some wonderful bits and pieces of talks, and I encourage people who want to learn more, and a lot of text from me as well, about some of the history of the Yew and some of the occult history of the Yew. So there's still some really good, valuable information there. People want to look into that, and they can email me direct through that website if they want to ask a question, or they have anything that's on their mind about the Yew, or anything they want to share.
No, I find it totally interesting, and I think obviously going through the experience, the kind of awake experience you had at the start and coming right through. I mean, it's interesting, and it's if you obviously if you're back in Scotland again as well, and you're doing anything here, let us know. I mean, we'll definitely come along and see you as well and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to meet you. I mean, I was thinking maybe this last time I was over, I would try and get in touch, but it was a little too quick of a trip. So next time I'm back, I'll definitely, you and I will meet and we'll go to some Yews.
Yeah, definitely. That was, as I said, that day I contacted you. It was funny because I'd never ever been down to. I've been to Rosslyn Chapel before. I'd never been into the castle.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's when I was kind of just checking a home board of the dog. I took the dog down, and as I'm saying, there's Yews down there. So
and there's probably quite a bit of connection with the Templar, the Knights Templar, and the Yews, because there's a temple itself in Midlothian where the headquarters of the Templars were. There's an avenue of Yews down there. So, oh yeah, if you can go down to Temple and find the old church down there, and there's a very extraordinary avenue of Yews down there. Wow. So whenever you see activity of the Templars, you tend to find the Yew is not too far away. It's kind of interesting. So that's maybe a story for another time. You know?
Definitely. Well, when we get you back on again at some point as well, it'll be good. So listen, Michael, thanks very much for your time, and I'll hopefully get you back on, and we'll keep in touch. You know what I mean, so.
It's been a delight talking with you, Chris. Thanks very much for inviting me.